Hey guys! A little something before the video start. As you may or may not know, I will delete all the NSFW videos tonight. I know a lot of you guys like them, and not only the Ida one. You know what? From now on, I'll stop saying Ida because every time I say it or write it, you guys are on my neck. So from today on, his name's gonna be Tenya for all of us. If you subscribe to this channel, his name's Tenya, okay? Okay. Okay, that was a little breakdown of mine, sorry. What was I wanna say? Yeah, so all the NSFW videos are going to be deleted from tonight. But don't worry, I'll make other video, like not NSFW this time, but don't worry, they will be wholesome too. I hope you liked this video, also. So I'll let you enjoy our adorable broccoli boy and let me know in the comment if you like this video. Bye, bye bees. She had first noticed Midoriya during the entrance exam. She had been raked with nerves the entire time. As an aspiring hero, she was scouting out any potential competition she was going to have to deal with. There was an explosive guy who hadn't stopped screaming die since he arrived, an uptight guy who had jeans on his leg meaning he belonged to the Ingenium family, and many more weak quirks that made her feel a bit insecure about her own. There wasn't anything about Midoriya that made him stand out compared to the rest. She had noticed his green hair and his freckles, but she dismissed him rather quickly to focus on passing the test. However, it became harder to ignore him when she watched him fly up to the air and one-shot a gigantic robot while everyone else ran in fear. Listener found herself paralyzed as she watched this kid who everyone, including her, had overlooked took down an entire threat by himself, breaking both his leg and an arm. She thought he was insane, and yet, somehow, he became the most memorable thing on the day she was applying for her dream school. On their first day, she had been surprised that they wouldn't sit beside one another. She couldn't help but lean over with a friendly grin. "Hi, I'm Listener," she whispered. He seemed shocked she was talking to him. He stared at her too long, like his brain was unresponsive, before he started stuttering. I'm Midoriya Izuku. You broke your bones during the exam, are you okay?" she asked. His eyes widened in fear. "Oh, yeah, I'm okay." "Good. Because I'm really excited to be classmates with you." She grinned as she watched him return it with his own shy smile. Midoriya was an easy person to like. Despite his shyness and low self-esteem that riddled him in those early days at UA, he was still a very likable person. His smile was contagious, and he was such a kind presence to have around. Being friends with him, Uraraka and Ida Leon, was easy because they were also pleasant to be around. Uraraka was bubbly and energetic, and while Ida could be uptight, he was always looking after them all. But it was Midoriya she found herself being close to. The two would oftentimes find themselves helping each other during class when one of them was stuck on a question or talking between classes. The conversations would usually surround around heroes, as it was the common interest between the two as aspiring heroes, but mainly because Listener enjoyed the gleam in his green eyes and his static grin spread across his face as he started passionately talking about some analysis he had made. Lunchtime would be the four of them seated at a table together. This time was spent to talk about school and their training. They even found themselves walking home together after school, sometimes to continue conversation about heroes, but eventually the conversation more to more private matters, their families, hobbies, fear, childhood, middle school, etc. This was when he told her about his relationship with Bakugo wasn't the innocent childhood best friend relationship the rest of the class had interpreted from Midoriya's childish nickname for him. That and Bakugo's aggressive and rude behavior had caused Listener to have a great amount of distance for the explosive boy, often getting into fight with him, standing up for Midoriya when he chooses to let something slide. He was actually grateful for her defense. It had been during the fourth festival that she realized that her feelings toward Midoriya were not simply friendly. When she watched him fighting Todoroki for the first time, the most intense battle of the tournament so far, despite how unwarning Midoriya seemed in his ability to contend with Todoroki. His determination shining through the fact that he was breaking his finger to even land an attack, something so she greatly admired him, but she still found her heart pounding in her ears. She did her best to cheer for him despite everyone's belief he was going to lose. But word spread through her, hoping it would be over soon. When Midoriya was knocked out and unconscious, the whole stadium was celebrating Todoroki's victory. She found herself moving towards it to find Midoriya and see if he was okay. In the end, he needed surgery before she was allowed to see him. While recovering from the minor surgery, Recovery Girl allowed her to visit, finally. His green eye widened with relief, looking at her sheepishly standing at the door, her face hidden as she was looking down at the ground. But even so, he was glad to see. He felt his face warm up. "Hey, listener, what are you doing here?" She began before she cut herself off. Why was she here? She was worried about her friend. She wanted to tell herself, but she knew she wasn't this worried about Uraraka after her brutal fight with Bakugo. She wasn't even this scared during the USG attack, but the thought that something bad could happen to Midoriya as a result of his fight filled her with so much dread she almost broke into tears. Even now, seeing him with his dopey grin, it felt as if weight was lifted off her chest. She was fooling herself to believe that she was just a worried friend, but she didn't know exactly what she was then. So, she forced a smile on her face and looked up at him. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." He nodded. "Thank you, listener." Midoriya's eyes softened a bit, even though his hand still had residual pains. "I have to wait here for a few minutes before I can head back out there." He started, looking over at her, a blush beginning to spread across his cheeks, and he tried to sit up more. Maybe you could... Can I stay with you?" she asked, hoping that was the conclusion that Midoriya was attempting to reach. To be honest, I think the festival might have just reached its peak with you and Todoroki anyway." He gave a weak smile. "Yeah, please." She closed the door behind her and sat on the chair beside the bed that Midoriya was resting in. She felt awkward. In a way, she never had felt awkward around Midoriya, who had always been a calming presence. Listener wondered if her change of feeling had caused this effect on her. Was she always going to feel kind of awkward around Midoriya? How were they going to be friends? Even so, Listener didn't want to be anywhere else than where she was sitting right now, with exactly who was in front of her, asking about her. She couldn't believe he wanted to hear about her underwhelming time at the sport festival when he had so much more interesting experience, having won the first round without his quirk, being hunted down during the Calvary battle, and his matches in the third. Before she had even realized it, they were taking in the same manner they had since they entered UA. There was still some awkward part of her that made her chest hurt a bit, but when it came to talking, everything felt so natural. Maybe this new feeling wasn't completely unbearable. Maybe she even liked it. It took her a bit too long to realize she had a crush. Listener played with the idea of telling Midoriya about her crush, having moved away from fear of jeopardizing their friendships, and hoped that he felt the same way she did. However, the fear of rejection had kept her from confession while she tried to work up some courage to take that leap. That's when she noticed a small thing about Midoriya and Uraraka. When he was speaking his hero name, she noticed he had been influenced by Uraraka and her words, just as he had been at the beginning of the semester when he repeated her word when he fought against Bakugo. Then, she found herself looking at every interaction between the two, her eyes following the way they looked at one another, the way they would speak to one another, how flustered Midoriya would get around Uraraka sometimes. He never acted that way around her or any of the girls in the class despite his shyness. Listener, suppose she never really noticed before, but now it was all she could see when she saw them together. Midoriya liked Uraraka, not her. At that stung, even though it was some unspoken idea, as she continued to try and appear as thought she was okay at the inside. but her unrequited crush made it difficult to constantly hang out with Midoriya and Uraraka. And so she found herself making excuses to avoid eating lunch or walking home. She thought maybe distance would keep a little bit things better. Distancing from not only her crush but the greatest friend she had made since coming to UA was difficult. It wasn't until they were preparing for the training camp that she had changed her feeling. Oddly enough, they were her feelings toward Katsuki Bakugo, who she had strongly disliked since the first day. They ended up on the bus together, and somehow they managed to start a conversation. She learned that Bakugo actually enjoyed the outdoor, particularly he liked mountain climbing. She wouldn't have said that if they became friends in one bus ride, but she definitely found some sort of camaraderie with him. Midoriya had noticed how close Listener and Bakugo were growing during the training camp. They were always talking during their free time, and they were together when preparing meals, taking away. At first, he was shocked, remembered how Listener used to snap at Bakugo and thought lowly of him when the year had begun. So he was confused why she was laughing around with him now. Midoriya could understand why though. Bakugo had spent most of their childhood making sure that Midoriya knew he was inferior to him. Because he was careless. Because Bakugo was good at everything and got everything he wanted. That's why he felt a pang of jealousy run through him when he saw her talking to Bakugo while avoiding him. He didn't like being jealous of Bakugo. He couldn't blame her if she wanted to be with Bakugo instead of someone like him. He felt foolish for even thinking that for a moment someone who was strong, smart and beautiful as Listener would ever be interested in him. Whatever chance he had, which he doubted he ever did, he had missed after a month of being too scared to confess his feeling and insecure about her potential reaction. It would be remiss if he didn't have some subconscious anger toward Bakugo for the whole ordeal, some amount of jealousy toward him that he had another thing to prove every other time they competed with each other. Sometimes, he just wished Listener would talk to him again. Midoriya spent a long time trying to figure out if he had done something that made her angry or upset with him. She would avoid hanging out with him and talking with him in class the way they used to. He would have done whatever he could have to make Listener forgive him for whatever he'd done to her. One day, after speaking with All Might quickly after class, he noticed Listener had still not headed back to the dorms. She always hanged back a little bit longer. "Listener," he spoke, causing her to notice the gray-haired male. Her face turned into a small frown. "Oh, hi, Midoriya. What are you still doing here?" he asked, his own smile turning into a frown after seeing her mood soared so quickly after seeing him. "Oh, she began before cutting herself off. "I was just cleaning my desk." "Oh," he muttered. "I was talking to All Might about stuff. Wanna walk back to the dorms together?" he asked, breaking into a sweat. She nodded slowly. "Sure." The two walked in a relative silence out of the building, neither saying a single word to the other. Midoriya never thought there had been animosity between them. Where he felt awkward and nervous around some of the other students at UA, he had oddly become quickly comfortable with Listener, being able to relax around her and have simple conversations. That's why he liked her so much. She made him feel calm and could always make him smile no matter what. Now he didn't know what to say anymore. It was like some barrier was put up between the two of them, a covering of distance between them. He looked over at her. He wanted so much to just listen to her talk about something she liked with a passion he admired from her. But he didn't even know what to say to her anymore. It all felt uncomfortable. That's when she looked over at him and noticed how he was staring, which caused his entire face to burn bright red, and he turned to face away from her. A small smile graced her face as she laughed lightly at his expression of utter terror when she had caught him staring like some sort of creep. Maybe it had been the rush of blood from his brain going to his cheeks, but he suddenly found the boldness to speak again. "Listener, how come we never hang out anymore? Did I do something wrong?" he asked, turning at her, cheeks still pink and rosy from embarrassment. "I'm sorry." Her eyes widened. "No, Midoriya, you didn't do anything. You're an amazing friend. It's just me. It was a misunderstanding. I never meant to make you think that I didn't want to be friends or anything. I just needed space to figure out something about myself, but I miss hanging out with you. Oh, I hope you're okay," he responded, looking at her with a worry. "Because I miss hanging out with you too." He hesitantly reached out, using all his courage while his face continued to turn in a betrayed, placing his hands down her shoulder. "And if you ever go through anything, you can talk to me." She grinned wider than she had in months. Relaxing into his touch, a small blush spread across his cheeks. "I know," she sighed. "Thanks." Repairing their friendship had been easy. Soon, she was sitting across from her at lunch with Todoroki, Hidari, Uraraka, and Sigh. She seems to be enjoying herself whenever she was sitting down to eat with them, but she could still go and eat with Bakugo and Kirishima from time to time. But he enjoyed the time he could see listener, laughing with them and having the same old conversations. He was glad to have the chance to speak with her in class about his new technique with his quirk, and how he no longer needed to constantly break bones to attack, and the new application he was ritualizing. He would listen to her talking about her quirk and new support item she had added. Being close to her again only further reminded him why he liked her in the first place, but he couldn't find it within himself to confess to her. They had just become close friends again. He didn't need to jeopardize it again. When listener had heard about the fight between a group of heroes and the Shia Sasakai, that had ended with several heroes and their interns in the hospital. She had recognized Midoriya as one of the interns who had been taken to the hospital alongside the big three, Kirishima, Uraraka, Asui, and Aizawa-sensei. She hadn't even been thinking when she rushed out of the dorm with the son of Hida screaming at her to come back. A single thought was on Midoriya. All she could think about was Midoriya and how he was. She thought about the entrance exam when she first saw him, watching him fall from the sky with his broken arm and legs, at the sports festival when he broke all the bones in his hands before needing surgery. Then, she thought of how she saw him after the attack at the training camp against the League of Villains, with 2 broken arms and a broken leg. Horrible images raced through her mind at the thought of something bad having possibly happened this time. In a moment of pure instinct, she didn't care about whether he liked Uraraka or not. She didn't care about if he would reject her or not. All she knew was she needed to see him and tell him how she felt before she would lose the opportunity. It was the only thought in her mind as she ran into the hospital. I'm looking for an Izuku Midoriya," she breathlessly said to the nurse at the front desk with urgency. "He's here from a villain attack and he's an intern at the night agency. I'm a classmate of his. I really need to see him, please." The nurses had barely managed to say what floor and room he was before listener went sprinting down the hospital hallway, apologizing in her wake, but refusing to slow down until she reached the door that the nurse had instructed her to follow. Once in front of the door, she stopped for a minute and took several deep breaths to calm down her beating heart and the pain in her feet. She kept her hand glued to the door and opened it after a minute. Was all she heard. Opening the door wide to find him sitting in the bed dressed in blue hospital sweat, his curly green hair sticking out with bandage on him. His expression changed into one of shock when he saw her standing at the door and a bit sweetie. "Listener?" he screamed. Without a word, she ran over to him and wrapped her arm around him into a tight embrace since the first time they became friends almost a year ago. She rested her chin on her shoulder and held him close while tears started to form in the corner of her eyes. She was so grateful that he was well and safe. "I was so worried about you," she whispered. He slowly placed his hands on her back, blushing from the neck and his hands were trembling at the feeling of her against him. "Is that why you took a train and ran 8 city blocks? Because you were worried?" She pulled away a bit, but she was looking him straight in the eye. "And because I like you a lot, and I don't want us to friend. I really like you, Midoriya, and I had to tell you this immediately." The word had gone through his ears to his brain to be analyzed before he felt as if he was having complete brain malfunctioning. Midoriya just couldn't process the idea that listener had just confessed to him. It was just some dorky guy she hung out with. He wasn't a genius like Bakugo, but her eyes were filled with so much sincerity. She had to have been telling the truth, no matter how impossible it may have seemed. "I like you too," he muttered. He returned her embrace and pulled her back in a hug. He was glad his injuries had been minimal from the way she was grasping onto him, but he rested his head on hers. He listened to her calm breathing, pulling her a bit to rest on the bed beside him, as she moved her head from his shoulder to under his chin on his chest as they lay together. He had been trembling and blushing profusely. He had never held a girl in any intimate way. He had never been confessed to by a girl. He had never even had a girl interested in him before. He had no idea what he was doing. All he knew was that listener was calming down, and she seemed content, and he wanted to keep her that way. It was also relaxing after everything he had been through. That's when he heard listener giggling into his chest, which tickled him a bit. He looked down at her in curiosity before she looked up to meet his gaze. "Hey, what's so funny?" he asked, praying she didn't reveal all of this was a prank that Kachan would jump out at some point to laugh at him. "I'm just thinking about how much easier this all would have been if I just had told you I liked you during the sport festival," she explained. "But I thought that you had a crush on Uraraka, so I thought my feeling would be unrequited." "What?" he exclaimed. I thought you liked Kachan." "Bakugo? It's just a friend," she retorted. "I saw you with him all the time and you were smiling around him, and he's a really hardy guy to get along with, so I assumed that you might have liked him, so I didn't want to say anything either," he explained. She burst into laughter and then dropped her head to his chest. "We're such idiots. We liked each other this whole time. Talk about wasted time." He started to laugh alongside her, wrapping his arm around her to feel her move up and down with residual giggling fits. She took the opportunity, with how distracted he was, to place a gentle kiss on the collection of freckles on his left cheek. No more wasting time.